Ladies and gentlemen, and fellow pilgrims, are you ready to tackle a massive bunch of comments regarding the moral argument that seems to have taken off on at least our Facebook page? If so, stick around. We're going to handle it, and I'll show you how to properly address them without getting upset about it. Here we go.
It's time for listener emails, comments, and stuff they send in. So kick back and listen, it'll make your grin. Every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. Yeah.
Well, all right, folks. So I didn't expect this moral argument to gain as much traction as it did. But first of all, welcome to the inn. Step on inside, come in out of the rain, the thunder, and have a seat by the hearth. Grab a beer, grab a coffee, whatever you drink. I'm drinking coffee right now. Decaf. Got to watch the blood pressure, and because it's evening here in Tennessee where I live, and I still love the taste of coffee, though. And by the way, again, I want to give kudos to Cracker Barrel for their coffee. Their decaf coffee is some of the best coffee I've ever tasted. And I'm pretty picky about coffee. Like, I don't, we have not too far away from where I live, we have the Black Rifle Coffee Company, one of their manufacturing places. And I think it's good for dark roast, but I'm just not a big fan of dark roast. Anyway, long story short, Pilgrims Grey Chronicles, Robert Clark, your host. And tonight, I wanted to cover some of the objections to the moral argument. We're going to start with the nice ones that were well thought out from YouTube, where people were very polite for the most part. And I really appreciate that. And it seems like at least one or two of the people actually took time to listen to some of the show. I have found that those who have seen our stuff on the Facebook side of things have a tendency, and I've told this to you before, and I'm sure you've experienced it yourself, but it seems like what happens is somebody sees like the image that I have for the post on Facebook, and it has just the two premises and the conclusion, because I clearly can't write out the thousands of words it takes for the supporting arguments to fit in a picture that's designed. And so they think that's the argument. And I'm like, can you not see that I have posted this as a podcast for YouTube? And go click on it and watch it before you comment. But, I guess maybe people think, well, I already know this argument, so I'm just going to show him that this is circular reasoning or blah, blah, blah. And so, anyway, long story short, got a lot of those on the Facebook side of things. And some interesting perspectives, even though it comes across as snarky, and that's fine. I've dealt with this my whole life. I've done apologetics before, and you're always going to deal with some level of mockery or scoffing or snarkiness. The God you say is a God of love is a genocidal maniac. That these kind of things, and it's just because they don't really know God. So who could blame them? I mean, they're commenting on somebody that they don't really know. They think they know, but they don't. They've heard about him usually, and they haven't really read, except for the things that are present that helps to solidify what they already think, and then don't read any further. Confirmation bias, if you will. Anyway, let's get started with the ones from YouTube, because I want to get through all of these if I can. Yes, so let's start with, well, first of all, thank you, Ivan. He's a regular listener, and I'll always try to put his stuff there first. um, and so thank you, Ivan. He says, very interesting and well presented and thought out episode. I appreciate it. I did take a lot of time on it, and I've presented it before, but this time I wanted to present it William Lane Craig style, where it starts with a negative instead of the positive version of it, because I think it's more impactful that way. I know the image that I'm presenting it with on the Facebook site posted the original formulation of the argument, but in the actual podcast, I use the stronger premises and then, the conclusion that God exists. So anyway, thanks, Ivan. I hope you're still enjoying your hat. Let's go here to QXR30. Interesting. Isn't that a car? I don't know. Anyway, so here he says morality is objective, and it's reflected in our legal system as society determines it's immoral to cause harm to others. The moral standard stands independent of God or any other spiritual entity. Okay, this would be an example of, I'm guessing, either somebody who didn't listen to the podcast fully or did listen and just completely doesn't agree with the arguments I used to support the idea that it still requires grounding in an analogy would be a compass point north, a true north, so to speak. So I responded by saying that it is a good observation, because it is. In fact, I think it helps prove premise 2. Well, I mean, he basically acknowledges that premise 2 is correct. That objective moral values and duties do exist. So the fact that we all recognize certain actions like harming the innocent as objectively wrong is evidence for premise 1 of the moral argument. We clearly live as though real moral duties exist. So the deeper question then is, what makes those duties binding, right? Laws can describe what society prefers, but societies also justify atrocities. Do I even need to name any of these? I mean, we all know them, right? So if morality were grounded only in social construct or consensus, then legal and moral would mean the same thing, and we know that they don't, right? So while our legal systems reflect morality, they don't create it. They can just be one way to determine objective moral values, and duties are real and exist, even if we don't necessarily agree with every minute detail of it. So the underlying moral law still points beyond humanity for that reason, to the transcendent lawgiver whose nature defines good itself. That's why we have the arguments to begin with. The farther we get from him, the more arguments we're going to have. Excuse me, had to have some coffee. And then we have Justin L. Oliver. That is my son's name, Oliver. All right, so again, on the moral argument. And I really like this comment. This is a pretty well thought out comment. It's an interesting take. And I responded to it, but let's read what Justin has to say here. He says, in the spirit of presenting the strongest version of the opposing view, which means I assume he's playing devil's advocate here for them, I think a skeptic would argue that God preventing people from committing evil wouldn't necessarily violate their free will to commit evil. So it would violate their freedom of action, or prevent the exercise of their free will. They could still have a free will, but they couldn't act on that will. God could also lead us to believe we are exercising our free will to sin, but it's only an illusion. So no evil need actually take place. Or God could unilaterally limit our free will to only moral good choices. And this is why a soul-making defense is a better approach by my lights. Also, when a moral subjectivist or error theorist employs the logical argument, then they are just borrowing from the theist without making any commitments to the truth of those views. I certainly agree with that. They are adopted for the sake of argument to show a contradiction. God bless. Well, God bless you too. I like the way that you're thinking here. But well, I'll read my response to you. I said it's a very fair and well-reasoned take, and I appreciate that you're actually trying to think through it. But here's the problem with that line of reasoning. And I'm not saying it's your line of reasoning. I know you're just presenting what they would probably argue. And so, if you've watched the video, you know I present the typical strong arguments that they do. So that's there as well. So if God prevented all evil by restricting actions or manipulating perception, free will would become meaningless in any morally significant sense. So the moment we can will something but never act on it, well, we've entered a moral simulation, not a real world. And that would make us puppets in a theater of illusions, incapable of genuine virtue or real love. So as C.S. Lewis puts it, quote, free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having, unquote. Evil is the byproduct of moral freedom, not the purpose of it. And I would like to say, in regards to your other point, I believe this is only during this current dichotomy where we are sealed when we choose to receive God's love. Because I do believe that one of the ways that God is going to rectify this whole thing, but we have to have it this way first, is those who truly love him will enter a time and a world and a new heaven and a new earth described in Revelation, where we will do exactly what you just said about having a range of good choices to choose from, free will wise. But right now, we are in a we are in the first phase, if you want to call it that, where people have the choice whether they want to be in that next phase. Some will not. Some don't like God. They don't like anything he stands for, and they don't want to be with him. So they'll be separated from him forever. Why would he force them to be in heaven with him when they don't like anything about him, right? So once that's taken place, and that's all said and done, then we will be in that situation you described. So the soul-making theodicy that you mentioned does have merit in that sense, but it presupposes the same core truth that virtue must be chosen under real conditions of freedom, which is where we find ourselves right now. So to remove evil by force would be to remove the image of God in man, our moral agency in this current dichotomy. So you're right about moral subjectivists borrowing from the theists, though. To even call something evil or good assumes an objective standard that does not exist in materialism, but, in God, in his nature. It's like criticizing a shadow while denying the light that makes it visible, right? All right. Thank you, though, Justin. I don't think I recall you ever commenting before, but I appreciate it. Please subscribe and comment more often because you're smart, and I really appreciate when smart people comment because I get so tired of the, you're an idiot. Okay, why am I an idiot? I don't know, you just are. Now I'm going to put some stupid meme up here so I don't have to think for myself. I get tired of that, as anybody would. All right, so then we have Benjamin, who says, but I think the first parameter is dead on arrival. If objective moral values exist, well, do they? That's a hotly debated philosophical topic. Definitely not settled. And then 1B, then God exists, which is the conclusion. That's an unsupported assertion. Why would moral values prove God? I might as well say if moral values exist, then pancakes exist. It is exactly as logically valid. Well, you can't really mean that. You know that's not true. Anyway, I know that the argument is that moral values must come from God, but that only works if you already assume a just God exists. So the assertion uses itself to justify itself, which is a logical fallacy. Well, then you didn't listen to the entire argument. You just assumed some things just from looking at the simple the two premises and the conclusion, without going over the hour and a half with the supporting of the two premises. But I'll give you a short answer. My reply to you anyway. And I do think it's a fair critique if that's all you read. But it slightly misrepresents what's being claimed. So the first premise doesn't assume God exists. That's the whole reason before doing the moral argument, I did this logically. If you, the week before, I did an argument from ontology, and it naturally flows into this argument. That's why I'm taking this step by step. So if you want to learn how to present a logical, moral, rational argument for the existence of not just God, but a moral Christian God, I'm kind of showing how to do it. So anyway, the first premise doesn't assume God exists. It asks whether objective moral values and duties actually do. So if they do, meaning they're valid and binding, whether anyone believes them or not, then we must ask what grounds them. Evolution, culture, and psychology can explain moral feelings, but not moral obligations or duties. So you ought not murder can't arise from molecules or majority vote. Does that make sense? If not, go listen to that part of the podcast where I spend about 30 minutes giving analogies as to help people understand it. So the second premise also isn't a blind assertion. If morals exist, God exists. It's a logical inference. If moral laws are objective, they require a transcendent moral lawgiver. And the pancake analogy doesn't fit because pancakes aren't the type of thing that can ground objective moral truth. Moral laws are prescriptive, not descriptive. They come from a mind, not pancakes or matter of any other kind. And for what it's worth, we actually walk through this in the full podcast. Like I said, tracing it from Plato through William Lane Craig and C.S. Lewis. I quote them. The question isn't whether people believe in objective morality. It's that we all live as if it's real every time we call something unjust, evil, or wrong. So anyway, if you have time, like I said, check out that section again. It's right near the middle of the episode where we unpack why atheistic moral realism collapses under its own weight. I may have even in the description posted, possibly, I can't remember now. I get so busy between work and running the podcast and living life because I have grandkids and kids and so on. Anyway, like I said, it's in the area where we unpack why atheistic moral realism collapses under its own weight. And hopefully I did put a time thing on there so you see it, chapters or whatever. Okay, so that was from our YouTube stuff. There were other comments. I just don't have time to go into them. I really wanted to deal with these comments from Facebook. Primarily to show how to properly address these without name calling and telling somebody they're a douchebag or being a snarky right back or whatever. So let's start with Lee Kolb here, who says, here, I'll pull it up so you can see it a little better. How's this? Yay. So He says point 2 is flawed. Prove objective morals exist, which you cannot do. So therefore, the third point fails. Doesn't tell us why we can't. He just says you can't. Just, asserts it without any sort of argument behind it. So I just said, Lee, simply saying flawed isn't an argument. Which part of premise 2 do you think fails and why? Why objective morals are real in brief. We experience oughtness, which, by the way, scientists can't really properly explain. We experience oughtness, how things ought to be, as binding, even when it cuts against our desires, right? Like keeping a costly promise, marriage, and things like that. Some acts are universally condemned, like torturing a child for fun, for instance. Calling that merely preference, which is what it would be if the objective morals don't exist, empties wrong of meaning, right? It's not evil or wrong. It's just, the same as not liking chocolate ice cream. Your favorite's vanilla. There's no wrongness about it. We talk about moral progress, right? Abolition is better than slavery or greater than slavery. And progress only makes sense if there's a standard above cultures by which change can be better or worse, right? And human rights language. All people ought to be treated with dignity. Why? If objective moral values and duties don't exist, who cares? You could have some other country that doesn't care, and you can't say they're wrong, because if it's all just subjective, then who cares? It's just one opinion over another, right? Chocolate's better than vanilla. But it presupposes stance independent value, not just taste or tribe. So why premise 2 points to God? On naturalism, you can describe how we feel morals, like through evolution, social conditioning, and so on, but you can't get an objective binding ought from those is facts, because that's all they do. They tell you how things is, not how they ought to be. Descriptions don't generate obligations. A transcendent moral lawgiver cleanly explains the normativity we all live like is true, right? So if you deny objectivity, then your claim, premise 2 is flawed, is just your preference versus mine, and it loses any ought force, right? So are you willing to say genocide isn't truly wrong, just unpopular right now, and it might become popular in the future? So again, we walked through this carefully in the episode. If you listened, you heard the fuller case. If you think a specific step fails, please name it, and we'll test it together. And he comments more. I'm going to have to respond to this too, but he says, I will cheerfully say genocide is wrong. God, however, says that genocide is fine. Well, he is God and the creator of all life. And if he has a reason for wiping out a group of people, maybe we should ask him and maybe investigate a little further as to why he would do that, rather than just outright call God genocidal. So if you disagree with God, then yes, your morals are subjective. Okay, Lee. I would just disagree with how you describe genocide or define it in regards to God. That's the issue with your statement. Anyway, so here later, Lee admits, because I asked him, did you even listen to the podcast? And he said, no, I didn't. Why would I listen to an apologist podcast that lies? Morals are not objective, and if you claim you get your morals from the Bible, then your morals are not only subjective, but also horrific. So, again, I could go tit for tat, but what I've discovered is when I respond, I always try to respond because my natural inclination is to get my fist up, right? Like, okay, we're going to fight, bro. I'm going to take you to the mat. I'm going to pound your head in the dirt. But that's my flesh, right? That's not what God wants here, right? So one of the things I taught myself early on that because I didn't, oh, I wasn't always that way. I did, when in my teen years, in my 20s, and I'm old testosterone, based. I did slam people. I did go tit for tat. I was just a snarky right back and so on. And I'm not saying that I can't be even now, but what I've tried to do to change how I present myself is I try to lead off with something positive out of what I just read, right? So in this case, I said, Lee, I appreciate the honesty, right? Because I mean, he was honest enough to say he didn't listen. I mean, he could have lied and then carried on, right? But anyway, so I said, but calling it a lie doesn't make it one. You're asserting morality isn't objective, but that claim itself assumes, right, an objective standard by which to judge truth or horror, which is my whole point. You can claim they don't exist all day long, but you don't live like it. It is not your experience. We live as if they do exist, but you say they don't because you don't want them to. So if morals are purely subjective, then no moral claim, including yours, Lee, carries universal weight. Yet you clearly believe, right, based off what you're saying, that some things are truly wrong. And you should see the contradiction. It's exactly what the moral argument exposes. And as for biblical morality, cherry picking harsh ancient judgments, or I should say seemingly harsh, without their context, ignores how those same scriptures birthed the very ideas of human rights, equality, and compassion that we now take for granted. So if you ever choose to listen, Lee, the episode breaks that down with history, logic, and sources from both sides, because I quote atheists and their arguments. You might be surprised at how much deeper the reasoning goes than memes and assumptions. All right. So, polite but firm, right? So then we have Mike on Facebook here. A brief exchange where he said objective morals do not exist, however. All morals are subjective to the individual and usually filtered through personal experiences, societal norms, and cultural influences. So I was in a hurry in my initial response, and I just said, that's not how any of us live in reality. And I explained this in the video. And he went on to say, well, you're also incorrect with that statement then. An individual's morals may feel objective to them, however, everyone is different. If an objective moral existed, then everyone would now and would have always, throughout time, shared that same value. Well, we can clearly point to this. I mean, we have the Ten Commandments, we have laws on the book, where many of them have never changed over time. We all know it's wrong to steal from somebody else. And that's been pretty universal for most of humanity. Yes, we're going to have arguments and disagreements on certain things because some people are evil. So anyway, I said, I get what you're saying, Mike, but disagreement about a truth doesn't make the truth subjective. People once disagreed about whether slavery was moral, but that didn't make it right when they approved of it. So if objective morals didn't exist, then we could never say one culture or time was morally better than another, only different. Yet we do it constantly. And that shows we recognize a higher standard even if we argue about its details. So the real question isn't whether everyone knows the same moral law, it's why we all act as if one exists. We can sit here and verbally talk a big game all we want, but the reality is you live as if they exist. You don't steal from people, you don't want people stealing from you, right? You don't go around raping and torturing other people's children, and you don't want yours being raped or tortured either. So where does that universal sense of ought come from if there's no transcendent source? Nowhere. You can't. And that's the whole point of the logical conclusion that God exists. All right. And then we have John Hopkins, who says, America is the most amoral Western nation in history. If God exists, he's definitely not your God, Christians. So I asked, well, I basically said, You realize there's no logical correlation there, right? In what he said. Again, I was probably at work and in a hurry responding, but he said, objective moral values and duties do not exist in America. Geniuses, that's the correlation. It negates the whole premise of your assertion. You didn't just prove God's existence, at least here in the states where conservative Christians deny the very teachings of Christ about poverty, loving one's neighbors, and tolerance. If anything, your if proves there's no God watching here. You speak of logical correlation when logic and faith are polar opposites. No, they're not. You'd have to demonstrate that, John, and you haven't. You can't just say it. You have to demonstrate it. Let me give you the definition. Logic, reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. Faith, strong or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence. Using logic to prove faith is a fool's errand. Faith, by its very definition, is illogical. All right, so my response was, I just said, John, you've packed a lot in there, but there are several category mistakes worth untangling. First, the moral failures of people don't disprove the moral standard. The fact that Christians fall short of Christ's teachings doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It confirms exactly what Scripture says about human nature. You're judging hypocrisy by a moral law you expect us to follow, which means you believe that moral law exists. And it's clearly objective because we're all living and agreeing on that same thing. So second, faith and logic aren't opposites. Blind belief without reason isn't biblical faith. It's presumption. The Greek word pistis, faith, implies trust based on evidence and reliability. Logic is the tool we use to test claims. Faith is the commitment that follows when the evidence points to trustworthiness. So if America's moral decay troubles you, and rightly so, that's not proof against God. It's proof that the nation has walked away from him. And the hunger for justice you're feeling, apparently, is actually the echo of the very lawgiver you're denying. So there's that. And then I responded, because more often than not, you get memes, right? You've seen these memes. How many more do I have? Just 4 more and we'll wrap it up for the night. But here's one. You can see this child here teaching kids to ask magical beings to solve their problems creates irresponsible adults who fail to find solutions. All right. Well, so I said that's a clever meme, but prayer isn't about outsourcing responsibility to a magical being. It's about aligning our will with God's wisdom, asking for guidance so we can act rightly. So even Scripture says faith without works is dead, right? James 2:17. The difference is we're not asking to avoid the storm. We're asking for strength and wisdom to walk through it. So if belief in God made people passive, hospitals, orphanages, disaster relief teams, and addiction recovery centers wouldn't exist. Yet the vast majority of them were founded by people who prayed first and acted second. So maybe the question isn't whether prayer makes people weak, but why so many who pray end up being the ones who show up when the world is hurting and get things done. All right, and then this one here. If prayers work, why do churches have handicapped parking? Right, so it's clever and amusing and a funny line, but it misunderstands what prayer actually is. Prayer isn't a request to skip life's realities. It's communication with the one who gives wisdom, courage, and endurance through them, right? Most of these memes are made by people who don't have any understanding about how God really works. And I don't think they care to, many of them, which is why they're perishing and will ultimately perish and be separated from God forever. And maybe they'll be happier that way, because I don't think they would be happy in God's presence, but I don't know. I would like to think differently and that they can still be persuaded, some of them. So if prayer didn't work, why do believers build hospitals, feed the poor, and serve their communities more than any other group? Maybe the reason churches have handicapped parking isn't lack of faith, but an abundance of compassion. Because faith doesn't erase suffering. It transforms how we face it. Just a different way of thinking, Mark. who posted that meme. All right. And then we have Mia Crosby. Here she posts, yes, I am an atheist. No, you don't get to question my morals when you believe in a book that features blood, sacrifice, selling children, sex slaves, oh man, that's hard to read. I should get my glasses again. Bringing a sword between loving family members. You don't even have the right to ask. Again, thank you for affirming objective moral values exist. So I asked, if morality is truly independent of God, then by what standard are those things wrong? Mia, you can only call something evil if there's an ultimate good to measure it against. Anybody familiar with C.S. Lewis's work would realize this. So the Bible doesn't celebrate sin, it reveals it. It's honest about it. It records humanity's darkest moments to contrast God's holiness and justice. That's not endorsement, it's exposure. So the question isn't whether Scripture contains accounts of human evil, it's why your conscience still calls them evil at all. Do you not get that? So where does that moral compass come from, Mia, if not from the very lawgiver that you're apparently rejecting? All right. And then one more from Mia, and we'll call it a night. Oh, yeah, let me get my glasses on. There's no way I'm reading this sucker by normal means, because my goodness, what in the world? All right. Glasses on. I'm not sure that's helping, though. Basically, it is she's quoting John Windsor regarding the Dark Ages, and I'll just I can't even read, and I'm afraid to expand it because I'm afraid it'll take away my comment here, and I'll have to go searching for it and have a bunch of dead air that I don't want to have, and I have limited time to edit. So, but this says, I responded by saying, John Windsor's quote confuses corrupted religion with Christianity itself. The Dark Ages weren't dark because of faith. They were dark because people strayed from Christ's teaching. Did we forget that during the Dark Ages, there was a horrible rise of Islam, slaughtering everybody who would not submit to Allah? There were reasons for the Dark Ages. Anyway, the Renaissance, universities, hospitals, and the very concept of human rights all grew from a Christian worldview that valued truth, education, and the worth of every soul, including women, right? Because up until that time, thanks to Christianity, women have the proper place of value that they're supposed to have in society. Prior to that, we know it wasn't good for them. So, yes, religion can be abused, but that abuse only proves man's corruption, not God's absence. If you call something evil or obscene, you're already appealing to a moral standard that must exist beyond human opinion. And that's precisely the foundation you have to borrow from the very God you say doesn't exist. So the real question isn't whether Christians have failed. They have. I do. We all do. It's why the moral law they violate still echoes in every conscience that condemns them, including yours, Mia. So something to think about. Anyway, sorry that this was primarily only about the moral argument, but there were so many comments, my goodness. And I wanted to be able to hit them all and not spend too much time, because these shows are really meant to be under an hour. So that being said, I will let you all go and pray that you have an awesome rest of the work week. And don't forget, if you are new here, please support us by liking, sharing, subscribing, leaving us a 5-star review. Anything you can helps, honestly. You can go to our merchandise store. I've put it in lots of, I mean, we have over 100 different podcast videos to watch. If you just go to our playlists, you'll see them. Video after video after video. And I get that some of them may not all be your taste, but they're out there. And in some of them, I have tags to what equipment I use, like microphones, cameras, and so on. If you want to podcast and you don't know what equipment to get, I share that sometimes. Also, oftentimes I'll put the books that were studied in a podcast, or if I interviewed somebody, I try to put their material in there. And virtually anything I put in there, I get a commission from, but it doesn't change the price. So don't think the price is higher, to give me a commission. It's not. It's the same cheap price that you're going to find if you go to Walmart or whatever, or whoever. I don't shop at Walmart anymore, since when I shopped online, I got screwed on my credit card and somebody stole my info. So I don't ever use them anymore. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Godspeed to every one of you, and I hope the rest of your week is great. And I will see you Friday night, where I've honestly been tinkering around with changing it from the top 3 stories of the week to instead things my wife Amanda and I talk about, because oftentimes we're talking about that anyway, but we bring up, as a husband and wife, we bring up some really odd, interesting, and tough subjects, all primarily related to the seed war, because we're fascinated by God's word and what's going on in the world. Anyway, see y'all.
It's time for listener emails, comments, and stuff they send in. So kick back and listen, it'll make you grin. Every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, yeah. Central Standard Time, yeah. Central Standard Time, yeah. It's time for listener emails, comments, and stuff they send in. So kick back